Hello developers, welcome to day 12 of the 30 days of JavaScript challenge. Today offers another challenge for us to take challenges and deepen our understanding of JavaScript concepts. Let's dive in and make the most out of this learning journey together. Today's challenge says, given two promises, promise 1 and promise 2, return a new promise. And it continues saying that promise 1 and promise 2 will both resolve with a number, and the return promise should resolve the sum of those two numbers. So here is an example. So example 1 says promise 1 resolves with 2 and promise 2 resolves with 5. So the new promise should add 2 and 5 to get 7. So that's what we should do in this challenge. So another example, there's two promises and promise 1 resolves 10, then promise 2 resolves negative 12. So the new function should take 10 plus negative 12 and the result is negative 2. So that is the challenge, and the constraint says both promise 1 and promise 2 resolve with a number. So let us learn some key concepts before we solve this challenge. The first key concept that we talk about is promises. So a promise is just an object representing the eventual completion or failure of an operation. So promises in programming are just like promises in real world. Let's say you requested a ride, then the driver promises you that they'll come in a specific time. So if they come in that time, they'll have kept the promise. And if they fail to come in that time, they'll have failed the promise. And that is exactly how promises work in programming. So let us look at an example. Let's say I have an object here, P. I'll create it using the promise constructor, like that, promise. So this promise takes in one parameter, and that parameter is a function. So it will take in a function. So I can take in a function here. Function. And this function takes in two parameters, that is resolve and reject. Because a promise can either be resolved or rejected. So I'll put it like that. So a promise has three states. The first state is the pending state. So the pending state is when a promise is neither fulfilled or rejected. That is the initial state. So when a driver promises you that they'll come, you're not sure whether they'll come or not. So that is the pending state. So if they come at the specific time that you agreed, it's called the fulfilled state because the promise was completed successfully. And if they come or they not come at all, it will be they'll have failed the promise. That will be called the rejected state. So that those are three states that a promise can have. So this is how you define a promise. So inside here, you have to have an operation. Operation, like that. Here you can have an operation. Let's say I'll just add two numbers. So I'll say const sum is equals to, let's say 1, 2 plus 1, like that. So this is my operation, this one here. So let's say this is the task that the driver you have requested the driver to come and pick at specific time. That is the operation. So if they come, so I'll put an if statement here. So if they come, you will resolve the promise. The promise will have been resolved, not you will. The promise will have resolved. And if they don't come, so I'll put here else. If they don't come, the promise will have been rejected. And that is basically how the promise works. So in this case, my operation is adding 2 plus 1. So if I get 3, so I'll say if sum is equal to 3, resolve. And this resolve, you can put anything inside here. I'll just put a message success. And if the answer is not 3, I'll reject. And reject, I can also put a message. I'll just say failed, like that. So this is basically how promise is done. If it is successfully, resolve. If it's not successfully, you reject. And that is basically how promise works. Then promises are consumed using the then and catch methods. So this promise, like this P, you can consume it using the then or catch method. So I'll start with the then method. So this then method consumes if a promise resolves. So if this promise resolve, this then method will be executed. So if a promise resolves, then it also take a function. So that function can have one parameter. So I can say it will take this message that is this inside here, this thing, you can call it any name, either message or result, does not matter. I'll just call it message because I know it's a text. So I'll say I'll take the message, then what will I do? I just want to log the message. So I'll just log. You can do anything inside here. So I'll just log the message like that. I just want to log the message. So this is if the operation is successfully. But if it's not successfully, I'll say dot catch. And I'll also log the this also catch is similar with the then. It takes a message, then you can do anything with the method. In this case, I'll just also log the message like that. So this is basically how promises work in programming. I think I missed one, but yeah. So this is basically how a promise works. So this is the promise. We created it and it takes a function, as you can see. This function, you can also make it an arrow function. So I can just delete this, then put an arrow here like that. You already saw how to write arrow function syntax, so I'm not explaining that. So this is how promise is. So this is my operation. If it's successfully, this one will be successful. We always know that 2 plus 1 will return 3. But if let's say this is something like 2 plus 4, it will return 6. That means that this one will not be successful and it will call the reject method. But let's just start with 2 plus 1. And if this is successful, it will call the resolve, and the resolve will call the then method, and it will log the answer. So let us run this code and see. So let us wait for it. You can see in the terminal it said success because we just logged the message. This message is returned. That means that this resolve was called and it returned this text, this string success. Then this then method was called, and what this then method, it took that message, then it's just logged it. That's why we are saying success. But if we try to change this operation here and we say something like 2 plus 3, we know that it will not give us 3, so it will not be successfully, so it will fail. So expect this catch method to be run, not the then method. So let us run this code and confirm. You can see it throws an error. Let us read that error. Catch message. Let us see the code. Maybe I didn't. Catch message console.log message. I think it's fine. Should not be that. Let me just run it again. And you can see it logged failed, and that was the expected output, because you know that if you run it with different results, it will not return 3, and this reject will be called, and this catch method is done that will be called. And that is basically how promises work. You just it is an operation that can either be fulfilled or be failed, and if it's fulfilled, this then is executed, and if it fails, this catch is done that is executed. And there's more into promises, like chaining promises and using the async await keyword. To learn more about promises, you can visit our Learn JavaScript playlist to see more about promises. The next concept that we learn is this one called Promise.all. So Promise.all, it's a method that is available in the Promise API, and it takes an iterable, like an array of promises as input, then it returns a single promise. And that promise will only resolve if both the input promises have resolved, and it will reject if any of the promises reject. So let me just, this is the previous code that we had. It's the first promise. I'll just call it promise1. Promise1. Then I can duplicate this code like that. Then get another promise2. So this promise1 was taking 2 plus 1 to get 3. Then if it is 3, it will resolve success. But this time I want it to resolve. Okay, let's just leave it success like that. Then this promise2, let us do a similar thing. So it will take 2 plus 5, that is 8. So if the sum is 8, resolve success, else resolve fail. Because we're not learning about promises, we're learning about the promise.all. So this promise.all, I'll just write it here. It is like this, promise.all. You have said it takes an iterable, like an array or mostly an array. So it will take an array of promises. So I'll pass here promise1 and promise2 as an array. So it will take these two promises and it will return a new promise. This one returns a new promise. So you can store it in a variable as another promise, or you can just call the then on it, because I've seen that promises are consumed using the then and the catch. So if you want to get if you want to consume this new promise, you can use the then. So let me just assign it to a variable. I don't want to use the assign it to a variable another promise 3. So this promise 3 uses this promise dot all method, and this promise 3 will only resolve if both promise 1 and promise 2 resolve. You can test that. So I can say we have already seen how to check whether a promise has resolved using the then and the catch keyword. So I can say promise 3 dot then. So I've said this then will be consumed if a promise resolves. So I'll just do like what you did before. So it will take the response, but in this case you can just put anything. Let me just try the response this time. So we'll take the response, then return. I'll also log the response like that. Log the response. Can remove this semicolon, or if it has failed, I can catch the response. Then I'll also log the response like that. Log the response. Yeah, I'll remove this semicolon. So basically that is how this promise.all works. And this promise.all will only work if both promise will only resolve. This then will be executed if promise 1 and promise 2 resolve. So now we see promise 1 will resolve and also promise 2 will resolve. So we expect this promise 3 will also resolve. So if I run this code, we'll see promise 3 will resolve. So expected rate success. Failed. I think it has failed. Let me check why it's failed. Did promise 2 resolve? Promise 2 failed. Yeah. You have seen 2 plus 5 is 7, not 8. So you have seen promise 1 is successfully, but promise 2 failed. That's why this promise 3 also failed, because I've seen promise 3 will only resolve if both promise 1 and 2 resolves. And now you have seen promise 2 has failed. So let us make promise 2 to resolve. So I'll just change this one to 7 like that. Then now I hope that promise 1 and promise 2 will both resolve. So let me run this code. Don't know what's the problem. Let me check. Throw an error. Let me just check the syntax. Did I miss something? No. So let me just save it and run it again. So you have seen it will return a success and success, because both the two promises returned. So this is the output of the first promise, and this is the output of the second promise. You have seen that is an array, and that is what the output of this other promise, because it just took the response and logged it. But let us say this first promise will not return a text. It will return the actual sum, and also this will return the actual sum like that. So promise 1, if it's successful, it will resolve and it will return a number. And also promise 2 will also return a number if it's successful. But if it has failed, it will return failed. So here, let us just run this code. You'll see the promise. This response will be an array of 2 numbers. Let us just log it. You can see it's an array of 3 and 7. So here, we can destructure this response. This response is an array. So you can just destructure it. Like you can destructure it as response 1 and response 2, so that you can get each individual response. Then inside here, instead of logging, so instead of logging, I can do something with these 2 responses. I can just do something useful with these 2 responses. For example, I can just add them. I can say response 1 plus response 2 like that. So now I'm adding response 1 is 3 plus response 2 is 7. So I expect if these 2 are successful to return 10. Because I'm not just logging the results, I'm doing some actual math here. I'm just adding the 2 responses. So let me run this code. There's an error. I don't know why this keeps telling me there's an error and there's no error. I know that there's no error, but it keeps throwing an error. Maybe I can just check what is the problem on this. I didn't return anything because we didn't log the results. So let me just log this. I didn't log them. It ran but did not log anything. So let me log this console.log. Then now I run it again. And you can see it says 10 because both promise 1 and promise 2 resolved. And the result of promise 1 was added to the result of promise 2. and I destructured the results here. This is array destructuring. I destructured each result and I got them as individual elements. So that is how you use the promise.all method. Now that you know about the promises and the promise.all method, you can comfortably solve this challenge. So the challenge, it says when we're given two promises, we should return a new promise, and the new promise will resolve with the sum of the two numbers that are returned with promise 1 and promise 2. So I can create a function. So I'll create a function. I'll use the function, the normal way of creating functions. I'll call this function add two numbers, like that. Add two promises, not numbers. Add two promises, like that. Then this function will take two promises as parameters. So it will take promise 1 and promise 2, promise 1 and promise 2 as parameters. Then I'm supposed to return a new promise. So I'll return a new promise. So you should return a new promise. But this promise should get the result of promise 1 and add it to promise 2. And we have already learned about the promise.all method that returns a new promise, but also takes in two promises as an array as input. So you can return that promise all. So you can say promise.all, promise.all. And you know that this one will return an promise.all. We know that this one will return a promise. And this promise.all takes an array of two promises. So it will take an array of promise 1 and promise 2, like that. Promise 1 and promise 2. So yeah, so you can call the then method on this. So you can say .then. So you have seen in the description, it says that promise 1 and promise 2 will resolve with the number. So these promises will resolve. So the challenge is that these two promises will always resolve, and they'll resolve with the number. So you can just spread the results. So you can just spread the result as result 1. So I'll say result 1 and result 2, like that. So this is just what you did in the previous example. I'm just spreading the results of each individual result. This is it's called array destructuring. So you know that we'll get the result as an array. So I want to get each individual result separately, so I can have access to each individual result. So after getting each individual result, and to sum the results. So I'll say result 1 plus result 2, like that. Result 2. So yeah, and there's a syntax error. This one should be in brackets, like that. So yeah, now my function is fine. So you can test this one with this example 1. So I'll just copy example 1. It ends here. You can just copy example 1 and paste it there. Then I declare this as a variable. Const promise 1 is equals to new promise. You can see this promise will always resolve. You can see it will always resolve. So this one is promise 1. This is promise 2. So promise 1, you can remove this bracket there. I think new promise resolve. Set timeout. I think this one should be there, like that. It's fine that way. That is promise 1. Promise 2, I should also just fine. So I can just save. So these are the two promises. So I'll call this add two promises method. This function I'll call it with promise 1 that we have defined here and promise 2. So I'm calling this add two promises function with these two promises that are in example 1. I'm trying to test if my function works. So you know that this one will return a promise, so you can call the .then. So I can say .then. I know that this will be the sum, so I can say sum, then log the sum, like that. Console.log sum. And if either of the promises fail, so I can't assume that all of them will be successful, so I can add a catch there. So I'll say catch, then maybe I can say catch the error, then just log the error, like that. Console.log. Like that. So yeah, here I've declared a function that takes two promises. Then I'm using this promise.all method that you already learned that takes 2 promises. Then you can do anything with these promises. And here I'm just getting the result of promise 1. What promise 1 will resolve, we have already been told that it will be a number. So I'm taking this number of promise 1, the number resolved from promise 1, and the number that will be resolved from promise 2. And if you see here in this function, promise 1 will resolve 2, and promise 2 will resolve 5. So I'm getting those two numbers and I'm adding them. So if I call these promises, then I'll also call the then method on it. I'll get the sum, then I have to log the sum. Then in case of an error, I'll catch that error and I'll also log that error. So let me run this code and see. And you can see indeed I got 7. That means that my code worked. But you can also try the example 2. So let us check for example 2. Promise 1 resolves 10. So I can just change this one to 10. This one 10, like that. Then it will run for 50 milliseconds. Then promise 2 resolves negative 12. So I can change this one to negative 12. Then it will run for 30 seconds. So I can change this one to 30. So if I save, so if you don't know how to use this set timeout function, you can just check our Learn JavaScript course. We explain this set timeout function. It just delays this function for this period of time before it logs. So yeah, let me just save this for example 2 and test. I should get negative 2 as my output. Let me check if it will give me negative 2. And you can see indeed I got negative 2. So that is the solution to this challenge. See you in the next challenge. Peace out.